Claire, I'm so glad you're doing this series. It's great.
Thank you. I love doing this. I think I hope it's helpful for people.
Mhm.
Yeah.
And then, okay, I'm gonna go ahead and people start filing in. Is that cool?
Yeah.
Okay, I'm doing it. Sorry, it's always, there's like a little bit of like I don't know, I get a little freaked out, but it's
The
okay.
curtain's about to go up.
Yeah, exactly. Okay. Welcome, everyone. We are going to get started in just a few minutes. You can share your name and where you're from in the chat to get started, and maybe just a word about how you're feeling right now. Happy to hear. People seem to be doing well. Wow, we have someone from France. Hi, Emma. Great. Oh. Wow, it really does. I mean, I just want to say it's exciting to see everybody's in a really good mood, but if you're not, you can tell us too. Okay, it's a space for everything. But great.
I see some familiar names in there. Hi, everybody. We're excited to see you today.
Great. Okay, well, I think I will kick it off. And I know that there's a lot of people registered, so people will be filing in. Welcome to Holding Steady with Claire Bidwell Smith and Tembi Locke. My name is Derek Hosberg, and I am the program director at Reimagine. As a nonprofit organization, we spark community experiences like this one for individuals, families, and communities to face the hardest parts of our existence, including illness and death, while inspiring people to celebrate life and one another. And there we go. And it is with profound gratitude that we thank our sponsors who support Reimagine and make this work possible. Thank you for that. And before introducing Claire Bidwell Smith, so actually, for those who were on the call last time, you may remember that my face was in the Zoom picture, and it was just kind of an awkward experience having that for me. So I decided to include a photo of my cats. And, I don't get that many opportunities to show them off. So just get ready. There might be different photos from week to week. I just want to make sure everybody understands how Zoom works. I know that many of you are doing probably like 10 Zoom calls a day. But on the left-hand side, you'll see that you can turn on and off your mic with that little microphone, as well as the camera. We love to see your faces, but feel free to turn that off. You can share comments and ask questions in the chat. If you find the chat to be distracting, in the right-hand side, you should be able to click that little arrow and close it. If you are calling in, you can unmute yourself during the small breakout groups that will happen at the end by pressing *6. So that is all our kind of housekeeping. And then I just want to, I'm sorry, there seems to be a little bit of a delay. Oh, there we go. Okay. So now we're going to actually get into the exciting part. And I just want to say, and I know she does not want us to sing, but it is Claire's birthday today. So maybe you all can just, write a little happy birthday or something, or just, wave. I have to say, in a former life, one of my first jobs out of college was being a birthday party coordinator at an art and music school for kids. So I organized about 300 birthday parties in a year. So it's a big thing for me. But Claire Bidwell Smith is an internationally renowned author, speaker, and grief expert. She is the author of 3 books of nonfiction: The Rules of Inheritance, After This, When Life is Over, Where Do We Go, and Anxiety, the Missing Stage of Grief. Her books have been published in 18 countries, and she lectures and writes regularly about grief. And if you haven't read her books, I highly recommend them. They're some of my favorite. So with that, I'm going to pass it off to Claire to introduce Tembi, who you're all in for a treat today. So go.
Thank you so much, Dara. Hi, everybody. I am excited to be spending some of my birthday with all of you. And welcome to Holding Steady. I started doing these weekly conversations as soon as the pandemic broke out. It just felt like we all needed some space to be able to come together to talk about grief. And I felt like I have all these amazing friends and people I know in the space of grief and loss, and I love having these conversations. Last week we had Elua Arthur. Next week we're going to have Dr. Ira Byock. This week we have Tembi Locke, who is one of my dear friends and just favorite people in the world. She is an actress, and she's the author of the memoir From Scratch, which was a New York Times bestseller, wasn't it? And Arisa's book club pick. About the loss of her husband. And Tembi is one of the most effervescent, resilient, beautiful people I know in the grief and loss space. Grief and loss can be hard and heavy and sometimes dark or, anxiety provoking. And Tembi always brings so much love and truth and light to this space. And so I felt like she would be such a great person to bring in here and have you guys listen to her talk about how she's moved through her own grief process and how she's found light in those spaces. So welcome, Tembi. I'm so happy to see you.
Oh, thank you, Claire. I am honored to be here as I saw all the names appear from all over the country and the world. I have to say, I got emotional. Like the wash of, I think it's that sense of the connectivity, right? In this moment in particular is something we're all craving. And I just feel honored that we get to share some heart space together for a while. And thank you to Reimagine, and thank you to Claire for inviting me to be here today. So I'm honored.
Thank you. Tembi, would you tell us just a little bit about your story of loss and your book and kind of, and then we'll go from there.
Yeah, absolutely. So my memoir, which came out last year, entitled From Scratch, effectively, let me back up before I tell you about the book. I'm going to tell you a little bit about myself, which is that my late husband was diagnosed when I was 31 years old with a very rare cancer, and I was his caregiver for what amounted to a decade. So from 31 to 41, I was a cancer caregiver, in sometimes the most acute ways and in sometimes more gentle ways, I should say. But that decade of experience, right, of like being at a critical moment when so much care, love, support, and grief was present in my life, I thought that was, going to be one of my screen just changed, one of the sort of big expansive experiences of my life. And then my husband passed away in 2012, and I set on a new path, which was my path of integrating and navigating my grief after a decade of caregiving. And so 5 years ago, less than 3 years ago. See, time in the pandemic world, I can't track. I sat down, I felt ready to begin to write about this love that I had, the loss, what I had learned, how I was carrying myself forward, And when I sat down to write it, I really just thought I would write a book to make sense of my lived experience. And I thought, if one person reads it, if 5 people read it, I just need to do this for me, because if I don't write this down, which is the way I felt compelled to move through my grief, I thought I would suffer another kind of grief. And so the book really is about this life I had with my late husband, who was an Italian chef. We met on the streets of Florence by chance. We literally bumped into each other on the street. I'm not giving anything away. I think it's on the jacket of the book cover if you haven't read it. And my life changed like that. And our life changed again like that when he was diagnosed. And then when he passed away, my life again changed. And I wanted to explore these moments of huge change, the love, the loss, the duality, the full complexity of that in a book. I wanted to do it through the prism of food because he was a chef. And the book is largely set on the island of Sicily, because that is where he was from. And it is the place that I traveled to with my daughter for the first 3 summers after he passed, to heal, to have space, to be in my grief. And what I discovered along the way, which is what the book is about, is what I learned about grieving in the presence of a small Sicilian town of mostly older people who have a kind of ancient way of understanding loss and grief and pulling you in and holding you. So while I was traveling to a place to both release his ashes, inter his ashes, kind of make space for this large experience, what I did not know I would find is the grace of a community, the love of a community, the lessons about how to carry forward, not forgetting, not leaving anything, but integrating the wholeness of my experience. And the book is really a love letter, both to place, to town, to that experience, to him, to food, to my daughter. And more than 5 people have read it. And that was a big surprise. I actually thought, because when you're writing something you don't know, you're sort of just in it, and I thought the best thing I can do now is to put the story on the page. And I also was aware that as I was writing it, I might never be with aspects of my story in this way again, meaning I had to travel to the depths of the day that he passed away. I had to travel to the hardest points of our story, of my life, to be able to write about it and to hold that space, which is what we're talking about today, right? Mm-hmm. And what I learned from that was a kind of resilience. I could see, like, oh my gosh, I can travel into this and come out of it, share it, make sense of it. But that was a process. He passed away in 2012. We're now 8 years later. So that just gives you some idea of the spectrum of how time is so essential. At least for me, it has been, and I think it is for many people. That was a very long answer, Claire.
No, that was perfect. What was grief like for you? What do you know about it? And what do you have to say to people who are grieving right now? And what was surprising to you about it?
Well, I say for me, everything had changed. There was the air was different. Literally, the sunlight felt different. Everything in life felt some strange way familiar, but different. And I really was, at my lowest points, I say, it felt like being on the rocks at high tide on the hottest day of the hottest summer, with my belly turned up to the sun. I felt exposed. I felt vulnerable. I felt hurt. I was tired. I felt like I couldn't get up. And I literally didn't know what would come 5 minutes in front of me. And I had to begin to make peace with being in that place, with whatever feeling was present at any given moment. And over time, what I learned is that I could allow myself to breathe through those moments with the knowledge that just like the sun would be at high noon, it would then hit 1 o'clock and 2 o'clock and 6, and the sun would go down and then would rise again. And I began to build a kind of familiarity with the newness, the uncertainty, and the loss.
Wow.
I also had never felt so much love in this new way. And the thing that surprised me most about it was, and I can only say this now, I didn't know this at the time, was developing a new relationship with my beloved.
Mm-hmm.
Someone said that to me. They said, you're still married to him. You're still going to be in a relationship with him. And I was like, what? That was when those words, when I first heard those words, I understood each of them, strung together in a sentence, but I couldn't make sense of it. What I now know today and what I've come to learn is that I am still very much in a love relationship with him in a different way. And we still grow in that relationship. That was a surprise to me, that his physical absence did not negate his love and presence in my life.
Yeah.
And I had to learn to evoke that, to lean into that, to seek it out.
I talk all the time with people and with my clients about building a new relationship with the person they've lost. You haven't ended the relationship. It's changed form, and it's not the ideal form you would like it to be in, but that relationship isn't over, and I think it continues to grow and evolve. I was thinking about my mom a lot today, just it being my birthday, and it's been, this is like my 23rd birthday without her. And yet I still have this very rich relationship with her. And I think that doesn't always come right away, but it's something that I think we really need to work towards in our grief. One of the things I wanted to ask you about, you've gone through something that some people have to go through when they're grieving, is you had to also hold space for your daughter who was grieving. What was that like, to be grieving yourself and also holding space for her?
It was the hardest thing I have ever had to do, and at moments it still is the hardest thing I've ever had to do. One of the things that I learned very early on is that although we were grieving the same person, we were grieving very different relationships. And so I don't have the lived experience of losing a father at 7. Mm-hmm. I don't know what that is like. So I could not although we both had broken hearts, she was very clear in telling me, Mommy, you don't understand what this feels like. And so that was a kind of big awakening for me, and realizing, oh, okay, I sometimes have to literally, and parents often do this, had to put my grief kind of on pause, on hold for a moment, and be with where she was. Mm-hmm. And many times I organized my life around what would be best for her, because I had this felt sense that if I couldn't shore her up to the best of my ability on any given day, and by the way, there was a spectrum of what that looked like, that I needed her to feel as safe as possible in order for me to even begin to do my work. That was the mother in me that sort of prioritized sometimes what she needed. But what I learned is that sometimes when I would be having, let's say, an okay day, or a day when I was feeling maybe a little more grounded, she might be having the polar opposite experience. Yeah. And having to be present with her through that and really listen and feel that with her would pull me right back into it. And so my nervous system was ping-ponging often between where I was and where she was. And that ping-ponging was exhausting. And I needed breaks, and I had to employ and ask people for help, mm-hmm. because I couldn't be everything at all moments. Right. But I did go out of my way to let her see my grief. I did not, which is to say, I did not overwhelm her with it, because that is not her task to now try to take care of Mommy. But I also didn't want to appear in any way like, I'm stoic, I understand this, I'm a neutral party in this big life experience. No, I cried. And I think it was important that she see that. And I tried to listen. I just tried to listen. Mm-hmm. And I asked for times when we could somehow find a shared space. So
Yeah.
I would say, what would you like? What would it look, what would feel right for you right now? And then we would try together to brainstorm something that might feel good on, let's say, anniversaries, birthdays, big events in her life. You know, when she would transition from second grade to third grade, and it was the parent teacher conference, and it's just me, not me and her dad. Like asking her, what would you like on that day? How can we make him present? Even, you know, and sometimes she would say, I don't want anything. And sometimes she would say, I'd like this. So I'd have to be very nimble and lots of help.
That's so interesting to think about. I think I see a lot of families run into conflict around the grief process because everyone's grief process doesn't always line up, right? Like you're saying, she would be in one space, 1 hour, one day, you'd be in a different space. And I see this all the time I work with a lot of people who've lost a parent. And so even adults, they'll all be in different spaces with their grief, and they get angry, resentful with each other, or frustrated, or even envious of each other's grief processes. It's so interesting. And I love what you say about trying to find that common ground, and to also kind of just, you know, asking her what was working for her. Someone asked me yesterday in an interview about grief shaming. And I was talking about how that's when, and this is like a new topic, some like this news person was like, what is grief shaming? And I was like, this is when you judge other people's grief. And we do it out of fear and pain. And I said that I think what works better is to be grief curious, you know, which is what you were with Zoella. And so you were not asking her, forcing her to come to where you were, but to rather to meet in the middle, and also to be really curious about her process and the space she was in. And I think that is so important.
And I will say, I scoured books, the internet, talked to my therapist. I really tried to ask the guides in all forms, right? Help me navigate this thing I have literally never done before. No part of my life is as it was. No part of my life feels familiar. So there's simply no way I can assume that I have any of the answers, you know, let alone all of the answers. And so therefore, really being a seeker and being curious is, I think, what helped me. And then sifting through all the information saying, okay, well, this might work today. And by the way, it might not work tomorrow, but if it works today, let's go with it.
I love that. I want to talk to you a little bit about resilience, because I've always had a really tricky relationship with resilience. And I see some of the people I work with struggle with it too. When I was going through my own grief and loss and trying to find ways out of it initially, resilience, the concept of resilience to me felt like letting go of my parents. Like I felt like if I were going to be resilient, that meant I had to be done grieving and be over these losses and let go of my parents. I realized later that that was not true, but that was what it felt like to me. And that's what it sounded like to me. And I realized later that two things can hold at the same time. I could be resilient and begin to rebuild my life and move forward, and also never be over those losses and always hold them close to me. What's that been like for you? What are your thoughts on resilience?
Yeah, well, you know, it's interesting. I think so many people think about resilience as an end result, meaning there's this place that I've arrived and somehow it's all processed and I'm, hello, at the top of the mountain, shining, and everything's all, that is not what I think, that resilience can look like that, but that's not the kind of resilience that I'm curious or interested in necessarily. That's the byproduct of a process that is a resilience practice. And so by virtue of the fact that we're all here on this phone call or this Zoom call today, that this very moment right now is an act of resilience, right? Resilience is a muscle in that sense. And it's a way each day that we rise and seek, even for a nanosecond, to be curious, to move a little bit closer toward the new life that is emerging in front of us, that is an act of resilience. And I look at it as more of a spiritual practice, resilience, right? And there are those moments when, sure, we're all like, yeah, this was great, but I think somehow we've come to this very narrow bandwidth of an understanding of what it means to be resilient, when in fact, being alive and being human every day, we're just not conscious of it, right? And so for me, what I have learned is to say, okay, I have walked up to the most fragile moment in life that will happen, which is that moment where we leave this world and transition to another. I've witnessed and held the hand of someone in that process. It doesn't get more rich, alive, vulnerable, harrowing, beautiful than that moment. And if I could witness that and somehow stand on my feet the next day, there is resilience somewhere in here. Even if I'm not don't know what I did, somehow I did do that. And so if I trust in that, and I also, I will say that one of the things I do try to consciously lean into is this thing called curiosity. I'm very fascinated with curiosity, right? How might I, what might my life look like if? Simply by asking these questions, we're already stepping into a more resilient space, because we're thinking about, this is where I am now, but in the now, I can hold the possibility for another experience, another day, and that's a part of that. That's, to me, is the bedrock of beginning of resilience. And so, yeah, I grieve my husband frequently, often, daily, and yet I can also write about it, talk about it,
live a meaningful life. That's be happy. Yeah.
Yeah, and my resilience scale, right? Because it's a scale and a spectrum. Some days I'm here. I'm like, you know what? This is all I got. And in other days I'm here. But the ebb and flow of that is a part of having a resilient life. And knowing that on the days when I'm here, that's just today.
Do you think self-compassion comes into play with that?
Absolutely. Absolutely. I say, in a way, it's like trying to create a love affair with your own resilience. Like, what would it look like to be in love with the most resilient parts of yourself and cultivate that love?
Yeah, I love that. I see people, and I did this myself as well, just be so hard on themselves when they're grieving, like that they're doing it wrong, that they're upset with themselves for feeling so vulnerable, for feeling, so many different emotions, for feeling unable to maybe do the things they used to be able to do pretty easily, jobs or, taking care of families. And I see people be just so incredibly hard on themselves, which I think just ends up paralyzing you, and you don't get anywhere when you start to do that. And I think that when we can be really kind and compassionate to ourselves, we can begin to find resilience in those pieces.
I love that you shared that, Claire, and you reminded me that, again, what I said at the beginning of our talk today, which is that I began my grief journey after 10 years of being a caregiver. And so a lot of the lessons that I learned as a caregiver aided me in my process, which meant as a caregiver, I had to learn to respect the days when I messed up, when it didn't feel right. And I had to have a lot of self-compassion to get through 10 years of showing up for another person, myself, my daughter, through all kinds of things. And so I just kind of carried that over, that mindset, if you will, into my grief. And yet I was still surprised by the things I couldn't do, the things that didn't make sense, the ways I was forgetful, the ways that I was suddenly my anxiety. Your beautiful book, Claire, when we met and you said you were going to write a book about about grief and anxiety, I thought, oh my gosh, this woman is speaking my language, because I had anxiety as a caregiver.
Yeah.
Boy, did I have anxiety
I bet.
as a widowed I mean, it was very difficult for me to navigate. And I was not sometimes compassionate about that part of myself.
Mm-hmm.
But over time, I said, well, you know what? This is the way my body and my mind and my heart is responding at the moment. And sitting in judgment of it isn't going to change it.
Right.
So let me befriend it. Let me ease it. Let me hold it lovingly and pray that it will pass. Because what is the judgment going to do? And I still sometimes wonder, wow, why can't I? But you know what? We are always doing the best we can at any given moment. If we could do better, we would. And so therefore, if we are doing the best we can, then let's respect and honor that.
Oh, I always love hearing everything you have to say. I want to open it up to some questions if anyone wants to talk about some of the things we've been talking about with us, with Tembi, or if you have questions outside of that for either of us. Dara, how do we do the questions? You guys can put things in the chat. You can also raise your hands.
Yes. So either one, if you we have the chat open that everyone can see, and then I can also, if you want to actually verbalize your question, I can just unmute you.
Looks like Stacy has a question. Yeah.
Great.
Hi.
Hi.
Thank you so much for sharing your experiences. I was wondering if either of you, but Tembi in particular, if there was something that you feel like you learned through the grief process that has helped you in these moments now, or that you think might be helpful for other people in this space that we could apply to all the losses going on right now.
Yeah, I was thinking about this yesterday in a conversation I had with someone, and I said it's as if we all have been asked to be seated, right? We are seated at a table of huge uncertainty. Some of us knew we were walking up to this table, some of us didn't, and yet here we are. And from that place, I think the best thing, or the thing that I am learning that helped me in my grief and that helps me each day, is to feel connected to others. I think it's why I got emotional at the beginning of this call, this idea of no separation. Grief teaches us that there is zero separation between us and another person. We will, zeros, I don't care if they're wherever they are in the world. And that's what I learned when I was in this small town in Sicily. I was like, oh my gosh, it's universal. And so in this moment right now, I think one of the things that I'm observing, for example, here in Los Angeles and New York, I know is doing something similar, but in my neighborhood at 8 p.m. every day, people are going out and are, ringing a bell, beating a drum, yelling, clapping, bullhorns, to all the first line, responders, people in the medical field. And I was talking to someone yesterday, and we were saying, wow, it's pretty powerful every day for 3 minutes out of your whole day to just consciously connect with everyone else. And the pain and the loss, the feelings, because for those 3 minutes, there's no separation. You're all this one thing. And so for me, I think right now, one of the things my grief taught me is I am my most full and expansive self when I can breathe into that, be with it, honor it, and share it with others. And so holding back our grief now doesn't serve anyone, right? Because we all need to acknowledge this because some people are not aware that they're even grieving right now. Mm-hmm. And so by making space, holding space for that, I think we invite everyone to sit at this space between our broken hearts and our open hearts. And that from that place, wow, we can do a lot, but we can't pretend like we don't have broken hearts, because then our hearts aren't open. It's this weird duality. I hope that answers it, Stacy. I think
Thank you. That was wonderful.
I love that. Let's see. I see Zelinda's question in the chat about, is there anxiety also when grief is more like just getting on with life and not focusing on the loss, but focusing on moving ahead? Yeah, absolutely. I think that grief is this really tender place. And I think losing someone is an experience unlike any other. And so when you do start to move forward from that tender spot, there is anxiety. I remember about a year after my mom died, I had left school, left college for a little bit, and when my mom died, and then about a year later, I decided to start at a new college. And I remember the morning, I hadn't cried that much that first year. And the morning of my orientation, I woke up and dropped to my knees crying and just full of anxiety that I was going to go now do something in my life without her that she didn't know about, that I felt like I was kind of moving forward in a way that felt like a betrayal almost to my grief, or a betrayal to this loss. It was very confusing to navigate. So I think the anxiety comes in all kinds of different ways. Tembi, would you agree with that?
I would 100% agree with that. Every time I began to do something new in the world without my husband, those were moments that would bring up big anxiety for me. And once I realized that, it took a number of them. I was like, oh, I think there's a pattern here. When I try something new, when first day I went back to work, in a full way, when I changed my bedroom, when I moved my ring from my left hand to my right hand. I can just a laundry list of things, right? It would bring in, and there was degrees of anxiety. But what I realized, okay, when I would acknowledge this is what's happening, and I would invite, what I learned to do for myself was say, can you be with me right now in this new experience? Mm-hmm. And when I would consciously ask his help, essentially, right? Like, hang out with me here. You were my best friend. don't forsake me now. I need you, right? I've never done this without you. Bank accounts. I mean, all the things that we have to, go through. That was very useful to me, and it made me feel a little less alone, mm-hmm. and like I wasn't leaving him to go do something else. But in fact, we could like meet in this new space together. That kind of lowered my anxiety somewhat.
I love that. Meg says, I thought your comments about lacking the experience to relating to your daughter's grief, even though there were overlaps, was really powerful and really well articulated. Thank you for sharing that. And then Joanna says, because this pandemic has served as an amplifier for pre-existing grief, do you have any ideas on how to strike a balance between leaning into our grief and focusing on creating positive experiences? Tembi, I think that was one of the reasons I wanted to have you on this discussion series, just because thinking about a lot of people who have gone through big loss are feeling a lot of like reactivation during this time. But then also kind of thinking about resilience. We're going to need a certain amount of resilience to get through this whole thing, and we're going to need to do it together. So I'd love to hear your thoughts on Joanna's question.
Oh, I love this question. And it's one I'm wrestling with, each day, right? And one of the things that I can say now, today, 70 days in, and I know that things are changing and constantly evolving, and my awareness 10 days from now might be different than my awareness today. But what I have come to now is an understanding for me personally that I have to ask myself each day, kind of do a check-in with myself before literally my feet hit the ground. It's like, how much energy do I have today, right? And that check-in is vital, because that's going to tell me where I am. And if I'm overwhelmed with grief, I don't have a lot to give today. And those griefs are, you're right, they're colliding, they're mixed up. I'm triggered by many things, right? News stories, personal stories, flashes of memory. I've had many flashes of memory in these days, especially when I hear any medical story. So first, checking in. And if I am in a moment where there's a lot of grief present, and I've come now to know what that feels like in my body, right? So for me, that's like a weightiness in my chest. It's a feeling wobbly, right? In a certain sense. I don't quite feel grounded. I feel sad. So when I am there, I go, okay, well, that's what today looks like. So today's not a day I'm going to be thinking too much about resilience and what I can do and all that. It's not that day. But the days when I am more rested, I feel more spacious, right? I feel more grounded. Those are the days when I ask the questions. And I think a lot of, and when I say those questions, meaning I think so many people are focused right now on answers. Like, what's the answer to this? When is this going to happen? What is that going to look like? Okay, we don't really know what these answers are going to be. So to me, the more valuable thing is asking the question and being in the space of the question. What would it look like if? How might I? Then I feel more resilient, and I'm able to be more giving of service, joyous, useful in the world. And I now know those are just going to look different on different days, and I'm okay with that. Because we've got to rest and take care of ourselves to go the long haul. This is a long process.
That's great. Christina asks, what are your thoughts on toxic positivity? I find myself expressing it in my grief now and receiving it. Does it serve a purpose or just harmful?
Can you clarify? Yeah, I'm curious. I don't know that I have a felt sense of what toxic positivity is, but Claire, do you know more about it?
I'm not sure entirely myself. I'm looking for Christina on here to see if maybe she wants to come on video.
Yeah, I see Christina.
More about this.
So I can't remember where. I also find myself more recently scouring, so I have a lot of just information gathering up here. Can't give credit to where or who, termed this. But I really just understand it to be so a message of positivity, but toxics in a sense that it's not authentic. So even merely like saying, how are you doing today? Like that smile and grin, like, oh, great. Or the buts, like, so in terms of grief, I guess, all those messages of, but they were, in their 80s when they died, or all these like, I guess like these but statements. I'm trying to think of other examples where it's a positive message, but it's toxic in the sense that it's not really what's going on. It's this like masked message, or like just being in. So for myself, it's if I'm asked of how I'm feeling, it's not really how I'm feeling, that constant like feedback. And then if I'm on the receiving end of things, it's being given or receiving information that's this positive notion when it's clearly not a positive situation or atmosphere or like feeling going on, but that blanketed, uncomfortableness with the reality of things.
Thank you. That is so well articulated. I know what you're talking about. I think we all do. And to me, our hearts always know if something is inauthentic and doesn't ring true, right? We just know that, whatever label we want to put on that feeling. I would say when those moments come and when I hear that, often what I now say is they're not ready to be in that, to be authentically with me in that moment, right? Or so if it's a question of how are you doing, I will often say, pat answer, real answer. And you'll know immediately who's in for like the real and who's more like, yeah, I was just asking that because I think I'm socially supposed to ask you that. And so as long as we're in agreement, then I can be in agreement to like hang out on the surface level if that's all you got space for. But I know for me to feel satisfied and truly authentic and then I've got to have the people in my life who aren't doing that, because we can't have a lot of that. I think the toxic part of that term registers with me when you have too much of that. It begins to feel toxic because it's inauthentic. Mm-hmm. It doesn't feel true. And so I would say if confronted with that, or when that happens, and it will happen, is to if it's someone that you're directly speaking with and you can invite them into test the water, see if they are willing to be a little more authentic with you. And if they're not, hold space for them and seek out someone who can. Claire, what would you say about that?
Yeah, I would agree. I think when we have that kind of toxic positivity, it's a way of like avoiding and not honoring our grief and our authenticity. And I think a balance can be found. You know, I believe that we can do both. But it's a really interesting topic and definitely something I think a lot of us experience. Dara, how much time do we have before we go to breakout groups?
Well, I think that's a question for you. There are some like really, I don't know, questions in here. It's like a little like heartbreaking to pause. So one idea would be to just not have the breakout, finish the questions in the chat. Or, I mean, I'm happy to just stay on for anybody who wants to go into the breakouts for like an extra 15 minutes and have, you know, if whatever you want, but we can also just pause here and go into breakouts. So it's totally up to you, Claire.
I'd love to do a few more of these questions. Sheila says, let's keep going with the questions. Maybe people can still do breakouts after we get through some more of them if they want to, if you're happy to stay on for a bit. Sheila also says up here that she loves the queries you gave them, Tembi. So that's nice. Emma has one here that says, I would like to ask about multiple griefs. Within 3 years, my brother, my husband, and my youngest child. My daughter was 15 and she was lost after her dad's death that happened when she was age 13. I have 2 other children now, 19 and 21. I'm petrified of losing another child and desperately missing my husband and child. It's exhausting to be without a child and my husband. I don't know that I have a question unless it's about the anxiety of the future. Yeah, that's a lot of loss, a lot of really big loss all at once. I'm sure Tembi has things to say on this too, but you know, mine is, I'm sorry that you've gone through so much heartbreaking loss. I think one of the things that's really helpful for me in grief is to really get present, just come back to the present moment, practicing mindfulness, meditation, yoga. I think when we're grieving, we're spending so much time thinking about the past, things that led up to the loss, things we wished we could do differently or go back to. And we're spending a lot of time thinking about the future, this kind of anxiety of more loss, or of just what's coming, what your life is going to look like now without these 2 family members. So whenever you're finding yourself spinning in those spaces and creating that anxiety, just narrowing your focus, like almost putting blinders on and just coming back to the present moment, taking it hour by hour almost, you know, but trying not to dwell in those 2 spaces for too much time, I think is really helpful. Tembi, what do you think about this?
Yeah, I just want to, you know, say how profoundly saddened I am for these losses, and I can only imagine the pain that is ever present. And so all I can say is to please be as gentle as possible with yourself, because I can imagine there are not many of us walking around right now who know your experience. And so you are in a rare space and a painful space, and just be gentle and kind and loving to yourself. And that is its own kind of practice. And from there, things will evolve, but please begin there, right? I think that is, and seek out people who can do that with you in a loving, gentle, supportive way, because that is all your loved ones would want for you. They would want nothing more for you than to be loved and held and supported.
Thank you. Dee wants to know, what did the older Sicilians teach you?
Oh my gosh, so many lovely things. One is talk about it. Talk about it. Talk about it. And then talk about it some more. That was revolutionary. Like, say the name of the person you lost. Speak their name daily, out loud, to others. Grief has a repetitive quality to it, but a part of that repetition is we're trying to make sense of what happened. We need to tell the tale. And so sitting around, women would like tell me the stories of their husbands who had died like 15 years earlier. And they would tell me everything from like the best thing he used to do to what happened on the day he passed to like, I mean, there were all of these details and like sitting and being present with that. And then at a certain point they go, okay, so what are you gonna eat for dinner? You know, like holy, like the light and the dark of it and the sense of both things can be present at once. Like we can be right now talking about dinner, but we can also make space for this. One of the things I loved, it was going into Sicilian households, especially of the older generation. And there's always a little altar at the front door or in the end of the hallway or sometimes in a living room. And there are photographs and candles burning, small votives all the time. And all the time, I mean, years later, like at the flame is ever present. It is like, you know, that to me, I was like, oh, because, you know, here, like you light a candle the once, the twice on certain anniversaries, you know, the first month maybe, but this kind of the ritual around it. And when, you know, I would be invited into their homes, they say, oh, that was my husband, you know, isn't he handsome? You know, that kind of thing. So there was that way of talking about your person. And then it was that other thing that I learned is that bring people in. People brought me in. I think they naturally understood that I was sort of floating a little bit between a former life and this life. I was in the ether a little bit, right? And so by saying, come here, come close, talk to me. It was kind of grounding to be able to be in the presence of another person fully and during my grief. And that I try to do that with others. Come tell me about your son, your daughter, your mother, your father. That was beautiful.
I love that. I love that so much. Yeah, I don't think we have enough reverence for ritual in this country. And I love that idea. You see that in like Bali all the time too. Just there's all kinds of little ceremonies and ritual for everything. I want to get to Sheila's question here that says, when my husband died 15 years ago, I was drinking heavily and didn't go through grief. In the last 12 years of sobriety, I have still not gone through grieving his loss. I have judged myself at times for not going through this. Any thoughts? Would it be useful to do some processes to access grief or just accept that I've never felt it? I mean, I definitely think it would be useful to tap into some of that grief. I don't really believe that grief goes anywhere until it's kind of had its way with us. And I think that it, when we don't process it and it's living inside of us somewhere and it's perhaps coming out in different ways, you know, that aren't as great as the healthy ways that grief could be coming out. So I think that there are a lot of ways to kind of return to grief. I think therapy, reading about grief, journaling, talking to different people, coming to things like this and just kind of thinking about your own grief while you're listening to these conversations, asking these kinds of questions. Tembi, what do you think about this?
Totally. I agree with you, Claire. And in some ways, I'd say the fact that you're here is a way of processing grief. It might not look the way you think it's supposed to look, but this is one way. An activity that I have found useful when sometimes I'm feeling like, why do I feel a little separate or I can't access, something feels off. I will write a letter. I will write a letter to my late husband. And it's whatever's on my mind. It's whatever's going on. Sometimes it's questions. Sometimes it's a recap of what's been going on. Sometimes it's, I wish you were still here. Whatever it is, that act of sitting down and just spending a little time and putting the feelings that is connecting to my loss.
Mm-hmm. I love that. I write letters to my parents and friends that I've lost as well. And it's been something that's been so helpful for me over the years. It's helped me connect to them, connect to my grief, but also just relieve some of my pain and angst. What's that?
No, I was just going to say, sometimes people aren't aware that they are doing things that are connected to their grief. You know, I didn't know about the term instrumental grieving, you know, which is like doing an activity that connects you, that reminds you of that person. That's basically grieving. Dad and I used to wash cars when I was a boy. So every Sunday when I go out and wash my car, I'm effectively expressing my grief by connecting to a thing that we used to do together. So you may be doing some of those things and not calling it grief, but in fact, that's what's happening.
It's true. I think people really think grief needs to look a certain way, and it doesn't always line up with how it looks for you. Jamie says, as someone who has experienced big loss, I find that it changed my outlook on life and made me attuned to its fragility. This has caused me to both embrace and also be hyper aware of the time I share with people and feel a deep need for personal connection. This pandemic feels like we are losing time as we have all been put on pause, and I'm struggling with how to reckon with the overwhelming feeling of knowing that life is so short and nothing is guaranteed. COVID especially intensifies this, but being unable to connect in person, see and love and hug my loved ones, gather in community, etc. Do you have any thoughts or advice on this? Tembi, I'm going to let you pick that one up.
Yeah, definitely this is a time where we are aware of the fragility of everything. I am now, when I finish these phone calls, FaceTimes, Zooms with my loved ones and friends, I make it a point to say, I love you. I love you, I love you, I love you. I care for you. I try not to leave anything unsaid, undone, because gosh, we're in this time in which we're so hyper aware of our fragility. I mean, we've always been fragile. It's a part of being human, but we're really aware of it now. And so I would say doing that. And then I would also say, yesterday, a friend of mine who was feeling very alone, she lives alone. Her whole life has been turned upside down by this. Can't have her business, her practice. She is immunocompromised, just finished cancer therapy. And she said, you know what? I need my peeps. I need to be close. And she sent out an email and she said, could we get together in intimate groups and just talk in an authentic way, not in that toxic positivity way that we discussed earlier, but like really get to what's going on here. And so a select group of people were like, I'm on board for that. And and I didn't know all of them who came together. It was about 8 of us or so on a Zoom call, but that felt intimate. And I was proud of her, and I learned something from her she initiated this community gathering. I mean, we can't sit around the campfire right now and talk to each other. We can't hug each other. This is as close as it gets. But if there are people that you know lift you up, help you feel more connected, call on them, ask them, can we do this once a week, every other week? That felt really good yesterday doing that. And that's something that I think is something we can do right now to feel a little more connected in a time of great physical separation. And then when you do that, really acknowledge what's happening. Like, don't get on the call and be like, well, yeah, I haven't put on clothes and, I haven't got out of pajamas in 10 days, which might also be true, but it's also an invitation to talk about the deeper stuff.
Yeah, I think this is where that intersection of grief and anxiety meet. This is, like you said, things were never certain. We were never not fragile. We never knew what was going to happen next, but it felt safer. The world felt safer, seemed safer, and now that's gone. And so there is that anxiety that comes with it, and we have to wake up every morning to it these days. We still don't know how this thing's going to play out, what's going to happen, when it's going to end. If we had an end date, if they told us, oh, it's going to be totally done by October 1st, we could probably all relax a little. And get through some more of this quarantine time, but we don't know. So every day we wake up to that uncertainty, and I think that's where that anxiety really sets in. But I also think there's something so beautiful about it. Like Tembi's talking about, saying those I love yous and not leaving anything left undone. I've always really kind of appreciated the ways that grief has pared life down to its essence. What is most meaningful to you? Who matters to you? What matters to you? And kind of taken away the certainty, but also shown a light on what matters. And I think that that's happening right now for all of us in this environment. So I think that there's some to be appreciated there, but I know that existing in that uncertainty is really difficult. And again, I think that things like mindfulness, meditation, I know that they sound trite, you know, they're repeated all the time, but I think that they're so helpful during this time in particular. And the sense of ritual, you know, that was the first thing I kind of turned back to when the pandemic hit, was my own sense of ritual. That felt really helpful to me. We are pretty much out of time. You guys have had such amazing questions and things to say. Thank you for the birthday wishes. Tembi, where can we find you? And do you have any closing thoughts for us? And thank you so much for being here with us today.
It's been an honor. Thank you very much for having me. We all learn so much from each other, and it expands my heart to know that we are all sending each other such beautiful wishes and support right now. So thank you, thank you, thank you. You can find me on social media. There's that, but there's also tembilocke.com, which is my website. And my parting thoughts are very simple, which is we are all walking each other home. Let's do that with grace and love, and rest right now. I think rest and hydration are like two foundational things that like grievers forget. And sleep is not easy when you're grieving. At least I found that to be the case. So finding things to help you do that will be really useful, and be gentle. Hydration, sleep, and gentleness can put you on a course to begin to look at some of the other things and sort of, begin to help your heart and soul during this time.
Amazing. Thank you so much. Dara's going to stay and run some breakout groups if you guys are interested in that. Tembi's provided some beautiful questions to think about and talk about for those. And then we will be back here again next week, same time, same day, with Dr. Ira Byock, who's a really phenomenal person to talk to in this space. Yeah, you might have to come and join Tembi just to see Ira. But thank you, everybody. Thank you, Dara. Thank you, Tembi. I hope you are all well this week, and I look forward to seeing you again.
And I just wanted to thank Tembi and Claire for this experience. I lost my mom 21 years ago, and even though I'm very much immersed in this world, I often don't have space or don't take this time or space to think about these things and feel these things. And I just am really grateful that this is like part of my workday, that I got to have this experience. So just huge thank you. So for those who do want to stay on, no worries if you need to jump out. That's fine. I'm happy to leave the breakout rooms open for the next like 10 or 15 minutes, and I'll introduce the questions in a moment. And I just want to say that I just put the links in the chat for the talk, the interview between Claire and Dr. Ira Byock next Thursday. I also put a link for the next dose of togetherness, which is with Yoko Sen and Rick Hansen on Wednesday, which is going to be a meditation with Rick. And then Yoko created a really beautiful short 3-minute film, but with the voices of healthcare workers, and she's a sound artist. And
I love her. She's amazing.
And she's just like this like magical person that I just love a lot. So I really recommend that. And then obviously Claire and Dr. Byock, who is actually a board member of Reimagine, and I'm super excited that you're having him on the call. So with that, I'm going to pull up my screen and, actually, hold on one second. Sorry, everything is, hold on. One second, okay. Sorry, somehow the slide deck got lost. Hold on. So I'll just explain the dose of, the togetherness groups. Hold on, back. I'm sorry. I think when I realized I wasn't sharing, that it got, Sorry. getting pulled up in just a second. And sorry, and Claire, I know that you have to jet, so you can jet. I don't want you to feel like you have
Thank
to
you guys. I will
stay
see
on while I try to deal
my
with
friend Nyla from last week. Hi. I will see you guys next week. Thank you so much for everything.
Great. Thank you so much, Claire. I'll see you next week.
Thanks. Bye.
Okay, it's loading. So if for those who have never done the groups before, basically I'm going to just whisk you off into small groups of like 3 or 4. And there are 3 questions that you'll talk about that were related to some of the themes of today. And in the group, the basic idea is that it's not about advice giving, it's just about listening, and everything is kept confidential. And you know, you don't need to share if you don't want to. And because I'm just having some major technical difficulties, I am going to just paste the questions in the chat so you guys can see them. And okay, so basically, and these were from Tembi. So resilience can often look like willingness. Am I willing each day to be loving and gentle with myself in the face of uncertainty? It takes time to build a resilience skill set. What is one small act of curiosity I can attempt each day to explore and grow my own resilience? And number 3, am I willing to see possibility where I have previously only seen failure, pain, or I think there's, or lack, or I don't know what word that was supposed to be. But you can answer one or all of them, and I'm just gonna send you all off, and you can, I'll close them in about 10-15 minutes, but if you wrap up before then, you know, feel free just to leave. But thank you all. Do you guys have any questions for me before I whisk you off? And I don't know, the other option, like I personally have to run to another call, so I'm just gonna be like hanging out in here. There aren't that many of you. If you just wanna share here too, or I can put you in smaller groups, whatever